Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a live edition of DirectXbox. This is DirectXbox number 12. Of course, all of our podcasts now will be just live streamed. So it'll be nice to basically have the show up when things are happening rather than it come out later on necessarily for like the public to see and stuff. And what we'll do is after this podcast ends, we'll have like a 20 or 30-minute post show where we'll be talking specifically with the Patreon through its own stream. So if you want to check that out, of course, you can click the link down below, the Spawncast network, Spawncast Patreon, and join up there. But let me just go right to him. The man of like the last week or two online caused quite the stir. So if people have been anticipating your return, Nate, to I guess just the video game world, the podcasting world. Nate the Hate is here with us tonight.
Yes, it's been a very interesting, I guess you would say, 2 weeks. I have been labeled a Sony pony despite releasing one of the more optimistic Xbox predictions videos for 2024. So it's very shocking to see the labels and harassment being thrown my way for simply reporting some information.
Video games. This is serious stuff, Nate. This is serious business.
It is.
It's
Apparently, I apparently picked a fight with the wrong tribe.
I mean, I feel like that's like all of them technically,
Well, yeah.
except for the Stadia. Hey, Stadia, we came in peace, and then we left quietly. Hey,
Yeah, we left
so
that civilization just completely broke, bankrupt, and devoid of life.
well, if people are unaware, Nate dropped some information that was not disputed by anyone. That includes Microsoft themselves around a first party Microsoft game, we'll say, that's been on Xbox and you can say even PC, sure, would be going to other consoles. We'll get into that though, I think later on in the show, because we have some more recent news that was very exciting with the developer direct that took place with uh, some pretty good looking games, I think, but also games that definitely caused a stir online just based on some of the directions that they went in. And I did want to throw Palworld in there because there is a almost Microsoft falling backwards a bit into what has turned into an explosive 24 hours for a game that I don't even think was on most people's radars until like legitimately today. So a lot to get into here during Direct Xbox. Of course, I want to give a shout out to the patrons over on the Spawncast network. We have different producers that I want to shout out here, as well as our sponsor being the Game Orb. Make sure you check out their channel. It is linked down below. They do all kinds of gameplay streams, videos with recordings, as well as go out to different shows and different events, whether it's different video game conventions or Nintendo Live or TwitchCon. They got all kinds of stuff going on over there, and want to give them a big thank you for continuing to sponsor the Spawncast network here. That's the Game Orb. Check them out down below in the description. Then for our producer tier, we have executive producers, Achievement. We have John O, Joshua Butts, Mr. Joby, William Hogue, and I do want to throw Trent A in there as a producer. So shout out to all the supporters, of course, over on the Patreon and Spawncast Network. Well, that link down below. Nate, let's do we want to start with we'll start with the developer direct. Developer direct. Almost 50 minutes. It was like 48 and some change. But they showed off games that are all coming out this year. So they all got the 2024 label with at least one date thrown out there, which is, exciting to see that because we saw games that we're going to be playing in the next 12 months at the most we assume at this point, right? Delays can happen, but they also show off a pretty good variety of games. Just general view, Nate, without diving into too much for any one game. What did you just think of the overall developer direct?
I think overall the presentation was a step up compared to last year's presentation, and it's just the quality of games that were on display was substantially of higher quality. The presentation itself, the the way it is composed, with the chalk outlines coming up, them writing on the dates and everything, I think is some of the best presentations that Microsoft has done. And I would say the show overall was a good tone setter for 2024 for the Xbox and Microsoft. We have those release windows on all these upcoming games, and it let people know hey, the Xbox is here in 2024. We have some major releases. Here are the tent poles that we are comfortable dating now in January. And we have something to look forward to with a release in May. And then we're going to look really to June, where we can get dates on some of those other titles, and then what Microsoft has in store for us for the future come 2025 and hopefully beyond.
Yeah, I feel like this was, if you just look at the show itself without necessarily like, okay, I like this game or not. I mean, each game had gameplay. Each one had a fair amount of time dedicated to it, and each one got at least a release year window. So in terms of, we always talk about how CG gets shown for a game and it's frustrating because we don't really know what we're looking at. In this case, they legitimately showed us in game. At times, it seemed like they were just sitting down at a computer, for example, with something like Aura, and just, hey, here we are playing the game. This is what it is. So in that regard, I think that is probably the best way to go. And I like the idea of focusing in on like 4 or 5 games at the most, but allotting them 50 minutes even just to really talk about each game in depth rather than try to jam like 30 or 35 games or something into a 45-minute block. So I think the direction of this, as long as they're able to do them, I'll say with more frequency, like they want to have one big game per quarter. I like the idea of them having one of these developer directs, 4 games each or something every other quarter as well. Like just kind of talk, big games, small games, doesn't matter. Just kind of
Hmm.
putting them together there and just going over or giving updates on titles.
Yeah, I think one per half of the year would definitely be suitable for Microsoft because we got those in-depth looks with Hellblade 2, Avowed, and Indiana Jones. And now, if there are any other games potentially coming this year that could be announced in, say, June, you also want to have that opportunity to have another in-depth look at those games. And as we saw with this developer direct, they're no longer exclusive to just first party, apparently. So if you can include some other third party partners, be it Square Enix, Capcom, Bandai Namco, and so forth, in some future developer directs, I think that can really expand the brand in a very advantageous way for Microsoft, where people can continually look forward to them. And it's a good competitor to Sony's State of Play, where if Microsoft is able to showcase some of their upcoming third party deals, be it Game Pass day one, and we're getting an in depth look at those titles, that's beneficial to both Microsoft and the development partner to allow the audience to get a nice view as to what the game is going to be, get a look at the gameplay, get an idea of the narrative. So it's hopefully something Microsoft will leverage in the future, and I hope they do at least 2 developer directs per calendar year. But even just having the one in January to set the tone for the coming year, have the major showcase in June, I think that's a really strong pathway for Microsoft as well, as we know they like to end the year with having a meaningful presence at the Game Awards, as we just recently saw just a month ago, where they announced Blade, we had the Hellblade 2 trailer and such. So Microsoft feels as though they're really approaching the calendar year in a very intelligent way, where there feels as though there's a constant flow of news relating to the brand and some of the releases coming to the platform.
So that's a good point. You have the developer direct to start, you have your showcase over the summer when, I mean, E3's gone, but they would do something probably to line up, I assume, with like Summer Game Fest and then Developer Direct close out. They could probably do 3 shows, we'll say, of like substantial value, and then throw some stuff in at the Game Awards at the end of the year. I think that would come together pretty well for them. And every 2 weeks or so, they have a new press release for Game Pass games, and they usually slip a couple of surprises in there as well. So I think the idea of just a constant cadence of announcements for Microsoft with how many IPs, how many studios they have, and then all these platforms they're trying to support, which take aside the consoles, but you bring mobile in. And I think these developer directs, it's going to sound weird to people now, but in 5 or 6 years, you might see some mobile games in there. It sounds strange, but I mean, we just looked at Aura, and that was a PC only strategy
Mhm.
game, right? And then it's next to first person magic shooter kind of game. So I that wouldn't shock me if mobile worked its way in there too. But
I mean,
just
that's
just
going to
saying. Just
be
saying.
that is going to be a thing that Microsoft is probably going to have to solve in the next year or so, is that once the ABK acquisition is entirely complete, you're going to have to find venues where you're going to showcase not only the Bethesda ZeniMax games as well as Xbox Game Studio, but also those Activision games. And when it comes time for a developer direct or even the June showcase, it almost feels as though there's going to be too much for an individual presentation. So you have to wonder if they're going to leverage things like QuakeCon or BlizzCon to announce certain products, or still rely on Jeff Keighley and other means to announce the next Call of Duty, or potentially just go to Twitter and do press release drops, because you can't envision Microsoft going into a June showcase where they're going to have all those Activision games, all the Bethesda games, all the Xbox Game Studio games. We're already pushing 90-minute shows. Are we going to get a 2.5 hour showcase from Microsoft and, potentially, let's say 2025, once all of this is truly under their umbrella? Or are they going to find a way to really space it out to allow all those franchises to have a little bit of time to shine without them competing essentially against themselves?
I feel like that's why they wanted to do Inside Xbox. Remember they were trying to do that every single month, and eventually they got to the point where they just had nothing to talk about, and somehow they wanted to do a 2-hour show, and it felt really, really boring and obvious that they weren't sure how to handle that. And now it feels like they could kind of do that, but I I think the idea of 2 or 3 developer directs at most per year, and then you have your big showcase. I think that can all work together with their press releases for Game Pass. But let's get into this developer direct. So we had 5 total games. One was from a third party that was meant to be kind of a surprise, although Nate technically ruined it on Twitter. And then 4 other games were first party games from
What
Microsoft. So the first one they the first one they showed was Avowed. That is launching fall 2024, Xbox and PC, of course, through Game Pass. And this is Obsidian making, to me, what looks like it kind of looks like their take on Skyrim. When I look at it, I was like, oh, it's very reminiscent of Skyrim. But the combat, they do have dual wielding wands, shield, swords, guns. They have loadouts that apparently you change on the fly, branching paths for dialogue. They say there's a lot of consequences to what you do, but I feel like I've heard that with like 100 different games at this point. So I kind of have to see that one play out. But for Avowed, based on what they showed, outside of, I think, my one concern is probably the combat looked a little janky at times, and everyone kind of said it. It didn't look like it had a lot of impact. Like if I hit somebody with a massive 80-pound axe, I kind of want them to reel a little bit from it rather than just kind of make a blood splashing effect on their body when it hits them, and then I just keep swinging. But what'd you think of Avowed, Nate?
Combat is definitely the one area of concern I have with it, and nothing in the presentation really assuaged those concerns. It was very unimpactful. Even the magic and such, it just looked very meh. But when it comes to an Obsidian game, combat has always taken kind of the background. The real interest of Obsidian is the writing. It's going to be the narrative, it's going to be those decisions and seeing the repercussions that those decisions will have. So if Obsidian is able to capitalize on what they do best, and that's storytelling, I think Avowed could be positioned as that nice fantasy RPG that the system is definitely sorely lacking. But the combat is definitely a bit concerning right now. I think the visuals, as far as the environments go, was really appealing, very colorful, definitely has that fantasy vibe to it. But some of the character models for the enemies that we saw, particularly the dinosaur alligator thing and the armor that they continue to show time and time again, something about him, it looked a little too cartoony to the point where it was almost flat in terms of texture detail. But the human characters look better than Starfield and such. Maybe you could argue that the visual art style or approach is a little inconsistent, but it could also have been the stream, maybe the quality of the footage that we were getting over the stream. So I think my main concern really just comes back to the combat, and as long as it is satisfactory and the story and the narrative go above and beyond and match the quality that we usually get from Obsidian, I think the game can overcome even a weak combat system.
Been visions of mana as well. I just wanted to throw this in there before we talk about Hellblade 2, mostly because Nate ruined it on Twitter and no one noticed. So I'll throw that in there. But is the
I did
first time
no
the Mana
such
series
thing.
this is the first time the Mana series is releasing on Xbox, which I had to think about that for a second. And I was like, yeah, I guess that is true. And it's coming summer 2024, Xbox, PC, of course, also on the PlayStation, and I don't know, everyone seems to think it's on the Switch too as well. But it's on the, at least at this time, Xbox, PC, PlayStation, and it looks good. We've seen it. I mean, we've already seen it, but visually
Mhm.
speaking, it reminds me kind of a Dragon Quest 11 with them leaning even more so into like the stylized cell shading look. But it was, I think, a good move for Microsoft to include this, even though they were obviously focusing on first party, because they are trying so hard to build this relationship with Square. I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, "Hey, you just want to throw something in here? What do you want to drop in here? Visions Mana, great, bring it over." Because Phil on
Mm.
stage, Final Fantasy 14, almost shadow dropping and then being pulled back. Now this, they really want Square Enix there. I feel like they're trying hard to get like Final in the background to get Final Fantasy 7 remake on the Xbox, and they'll probably position to try to get 17 as well when that's ready in like 8 years or something.
Yeah, this move mostly felt to me as though a means of Microsoft saying, we will work well with you, Square Enix, give us an opportunity to showcase one of your games. And it's a Visions of Mana, likely a game that Sony's not that invested in because Sony's main focus right now is going to be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That's the game they want to market. That's something they have a vested interest in. They have the exclusive clause with it. That's something that they're hoping to move hardware with. When you look at Visions of Mana, it's a good opportunity for Microsoft to play nice with Square. I think it was kind of a bit of a misfire on Microsoft's side not to pair the Square Enix segment of the Developer Direct by giving a release date to Octopath Traveler 2 because it was only dated for early 2024 back at the Tokyo Game Show, and we are now in early 2024. So I think that would have been a nice opportunity to give that a release date, confirm if it's coming to Game Pass, and even date Final Fantasy 14 and when that will begin on the Xbox because you had the Blogwire post go up early. We know it's coming in February. This would have been that nice opportunity to just say, here's a few things we are working with Square Enix on for the Xbox brand and do a nice little compact announcement. And it would get people kind of talking about the significance of Square Enix interrupted the Developer Direct. That, yes, we've only had two of these broadcasts so far, but they've always been first party focused. Now that they're there, what type of future opportunities does this mean for the Developer Direct? So I think it could have gone a little further than it did, because otherwise it almost felt out of place. And I saw a lot of online reaction of people being confused. And the fact that the Visions of Mana segment ended simply with a coming out summer 2024 and there was no Game Pass announcement or such, it kind of had people just scratching their head of what was the significance of this. And the significance really just comes down to Microsoft and Square Enix have a healthy relationship right now, and hopefully this is just a start and bigger, greater things are to come.
I almost wonder if that's something they're saving for an even bigger event if they do a big blowout with Square, where they have like a big sizzle reel of all these different games that they're bringing in. Because they did that before with the older Final Fantasies. They're like, we're all of them are going to be available in Game Pass at some point. I almost wonder if they would reenact that, but with Final Fantasy VII Remake and 16 and all these other things down the road, if they could make it all happen together, but save that for their big game showcase over the summer. But it does seem like they're becoming closer and closer with Square Enix, and let's be real, Square Enix probably sees Microsoft as a massive checkbook that they can leverage. Just to be real, that's probably what they're seeing, and I would be
Mhm.
shocked if they Square Enix also looks at Microsoft and a lot of the advancements they're making with AI, as they've talked about blockchain, AI, all those technology words that get thrown around. Square's doing all of it, or at least looking into it. I mean, they look at Microsoft and realize that they are at like the forefront of artificial intelligence currently, and that could play into a future with games. So why not position alongside one of the biggest players there? So I think there's a lot of layers to that entire, we'll say, relationship that's forming right now. But hey, if it means they could get more of their games onto the Xbox
Mhm.
platform and Game Pass, and Square can get more money to make more Final Fantasies, then sure, why not? Let's
Yeah,
see it
it's
happen.
gonna it's gonna be interesting to see how the relationship really develops and evolves over the coming months throughout 2024 and into 2025. Because as you mentioned, we have seen the Square Enix Xbox relationship kind of blossom before, where Square Enix and Microsoft did partner to bring pretty much every mainline Final Fantasy game to Game Pass at one point. And that was a big announcement at the time. A lot of excitement were around it. And then things significantly cooled between the two. And now that it's ramping back up with 14 Octopath Traveler, Visions of Mana, ideally we see some other games from the back catalog, something like Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. By no means a huge release, but if that's something they can get on Game Pass day one and they could announce at, let's say, the June showcase, maybe Tokyo Game Show, because it's not that big of a deal, it would at least give people confidence that there is something brewing between the two, and maybe it gets on the same level of what we're seeing Microsoft and Sega Atlas kind of formulating right now. Because whenever there is a Persona release, it's come to Game Pass. We also saw Microsoft have the marketing rights to a brand new IP coming from the Persona team back at the showcase last June.
Hmm.
So if we can see that develop with Square Enix, something similar to that, that can be a huge advantage for Microsoft moving forward because it allows them to offer a variety of game options in both Game Pass and just the platform itself. It will never compete with the PlayStation when it comes to Square Enix support, but at least they can look to it and say, we have these games as well. And that's important when you're building, an ecosystem to say we do have the support of a company
Okay, Nate.
like Square. We have Atlas as well. We're not going to take over Japan, but we can get that Western fan that's interested in those Japanese games at least. And they can be a little more competitive with both Sony and Nintendo when it comes to the Japanese RPG or anything from, Square Enix type company.
I lost you there for a minute. That's why I started talking. Okay, Nate. Hellblade 2. Hellblade 2 got its release date. And it's about where we figured we thought it'd be first half of this year. It's May 21st, 2024. Hey, that rumor ended up being correct. So we're looking third week of May, Xbox, of course, and PC through Game Pass. Before I get to the part that kind of set the internet off a bit, from what we saw, the game looks super high quality. Like visually, it looks great. The audio is probably the biggest thing in Make 2 to push that, where instead of it just being sort of the spatial sound for voice, it's everything. Like all the sounds, the environments, all of that will also work into them projecting sound behind you. Like you want to play this with headphones like you did the first one, but it is I kind of feel like that third person narrative driven experience that has that attention to detail and that high quality that Microsoft has been looking to push more and more to kind of compete right next to Sony to a degree. Although, again, we're going to come back around to some of the things that have kind of put people a bit off of this release, even. But we've seen this multiple times. We were just waiting for that release date at this point, weren't we, Nate?
Yeah, we were just waiting for him to finally give it a release date. We've seen Hellblade 2 dating back to December of 2019. So it was definitely a case of just give us a release date. We just saw it at the Game Awards, and I guess you could make the argument that they could have dated it there, but at least we got an in depth look at the combat system, the sound system with the spatial binary, and all those features. So it was a good way for us to see the improvements and how they've expanded on the scope of the game from the original. But it's great to finally have a release date, have it come out in just 4 more months, and really be the first major release that the platform has seen since what, last September. So it starts 2024 off stronger than what we had in 2023, where I guess you would make the argument that Redfall is what started last year, and we all saw how that went.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. Hey, some of us beat that game. Thank you.
Yes,
We
I was
saw
there.
we saw those achievement percentages.
We saw the single digit achievement percentages pop up when we
We
took
beat the
out
game and
the
it came up like 0.2% or something. Oh no.
yeah, and then the game just kind of ended. It's just like you beat the game. Here's the
It
credits, and we all sat there saying that was it.
it did. I didn't feel the need to go back for more. So I was
Hey,
good there.
we still
I
have
was good.
DLC coming.
Oh, great. Can't can't wait for that one. Okay, so Hellblade 2, Nate, is okay, digital only. It's $50 and the length has been compared to the first one. So there's a lot that they just threw out immediately with that in the press release that followed after showing it off. Digital only $50, similar length as the first one. So people are thinking, okay, this is a 7 or 8 hour game, and it's kind of reflective on the price point that they're putting it at with $50. Because remember, we're up to $70 games now, so technically that's a bigger gap between full price and this. I mean, more budget oriented price that we see with something like an Assassin's Creed Mirage, as an example, right? So that immediately spells okay, shorter experience, but not necessarily a bad experience, but not in their mind enough to justify the $70 tag, and apparently not enough to justify a physical release. That's the one that tripped me a bit. I get okay, $50 sure, because let's be real, they're trying to get people into Game Pass anyway. Digital only. We saw it with Alan Wake 2. We're seeing it with Hellblade 2. There's also a memo going around at Walmart that's apparently mentioning Starfield Xbox physical copies even being pulled from shelves.
Mhm.
I don't really get what that one's about, but it does kind of link up to them saying, okay, this first party game is going to be digital only. Is this is this a trend we're going to see continued over the next couple of years now for to end this generation? Really, we're technically in the second half, just about of this generation. We're seeing systems that don't have disk drives for like by default with the PS5 now with that new system. You got to get an attachable one. Microsoft's been doing it since the beginning, of course, with their Series S. Hmm. What do you think, Nate? Is this are we seeing that shift, like official shift? Okay, guys, digital only. It's we're almost there.
I wouldn't say that we are now beginning to see that shift. I'd say we began to see the shift in 2020 because look at the amount of Xbox games released this generation already that lack a retail presence. Hi-Fi Rush,
Mm.
Pentiment, Grounded. There are numerous games. Hellblade 2 is simply continuing that, and you could make the case that other titles, be it Halo Infinite, Starfield, and such, that did have retail releases, didn't have the complete game on the disc to begin with. So, in the case of Hellblade 2, it's really mirroring the exact release pattern that the first game had. If you remember, when it was a PlayStation 4 exclusive, it was digital only. It was eventually a year later published at retail by 505. And then when Microsoft bought Ninja Theory, they also published a physical version of Hellblade for the Xbox, while the Switch continues to remain digital only. So with Hellblade 2 being digital only, it's not that surprising given the trend that Microsoft has really approached this generation as. The $50 price point, I think, is more surprising, and it definitely brings up the question of by going digital only, did that allow them to come in at a discounted budget price of $50? Whereas, had they done a physical retail presence, would it have been 70?
Hmm. I I wonder how big Hellblade 2 is in terms of file size. Because
Given the
I
quality of the assets and everything that we're seeing, and you have to figure it's coming in at a minimum of at least what 35 gigs.
you
Because
think
what
it's
was
that
the?
small?
You think it's going to eclipse 50?
I mean, that you see that game, and I almost wonder if there's like uncompressed textures, uncompressed audio, the whole thing, and it comes into where it's larger than what like a single layer Blu-ray or even a dual layer Blu-ray, right? Because I was unaware of this at first. MVG kind of alluded to it, then told me about it. Was that the reason? For example, Baldur's Gate 3 is an extra disc compared to the PS5 version because Microsoft apparently doesn't have that 100 gigabyte Blu-ray disc, or they never really used it or care to use it. And I must wonder if they're thinking we're already just about to the end of the generation. Why would we use it anyway now? Or for like the physical media, or they just don't have enough where they feel the need to print it. Like, are they to that point now, do you think, where they feel like it's just not viable, it's not worth it? Because I mean, they have the numbers on their end for digital
Hmm.
to physical split. And I feel like with things like Game Pass and them obviously pushing out early on a system that was cheaper and had the $300 price on it, that I mean might be 50-50 or close to it. I was wondering if they're like, yeah, well, well, we could probably do this digital only. I think that would work.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
think it really comes down to their main focus is to sell a service, and that service is Game Pass, and they are
Mm,
definitely going to want to position something like Hellblade 2 as a Game Pass game, though you could make the counter argument that if they really want to entice you into a Game Pass subscription, should they have then priced the game at $70 to make Game Pass a more appealing acquisition to you? Because at $50 as a budget, you might have more interest in just buying the game outright versus subscribing to Game Pass to access it.
that's true. Yet, do you think this plays anything at all into a mid-gen refresh with no disk drive? There's like, it's coming up anyway. Why are we gonna do a physical release of this thing?
If the slide had never leaked, would you make that connection, or is it something that you
No.
only make
I mean,
because the slide had leaked?
I would have made that. I've made that connection before the slide that the next generation won't have a disk drive in. I thought 2028, but now we're hearing like, oh, it might start sooner at 2026 or something. But even then, I'm thinking that just wouldn't have a disk
Hmm.
drive either, and that would be their big push and the reason they'd make the breakaway. But that's kind of where I am with that. Is they're working towards it. It's more a matter of when, not if, at this time. And I don't know that Hellblade 2 at digital only that caught me off guard a little bit. I'll admit, it being $50 is like, oh, this is not what I was expecting.
I think the price point caught a lot of people by surprise because this is the first Xbox Series X game that we saw. We saw this game
Hmm.
4+ years ago, and everyone was kind of envisioning it as that first major release for the hardware. This was going to be that visual showcase. This was going to be positioned as a huge, huge release for the platform. And then for it to come in at a budget price is definitely a case of wonder of, okay, why is this coming in a little cheaper? And I mean, maybe the budget of the game is substantially lower, or
Do you think
Microsoft.
so? I mean, it's been in development for. I mean, well, okay, it's a 7 year gap just about from the first one.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean they were working on it immediately after the end of the first one, but I mean, kind of close to it if you think. I mean, they showed it in 2019, right next to the Xbox Series X.
Mhm.
So it's been worked. I mean, some of the stuff they're showing when they did the developer direct that looked expensive. Some of the stuff they were using. So
Yeah, very.
a
I
7 to 8 hour game for six. We'll even just say 6 years of development time. That's that. I assume this is going to be just a super high quality, heavy attention detail, all the bells and whistles of visuals and audio, and
mhm.
hopefully it doesn't feel even at 78 hours as bloated. If it's just like a tight knit 7 to 8 hours, and I'm subscribed to Game Pass, so I'm just getting it there and playing it. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. But it's expectations. I think for those 7 to 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours are a bit higher for me now because I'm like, oh, okay, what have they working on this past 6 or 7 years that amounts to that 7 or 8 hour game?
That's the thing with Ninja Theory and Hellblade. It's definitely a game that you don't want to overstay its welcome. It has a
Hmm,
very clear point that it wants to make with its narrative. So going like full open world, God of War Ragnarok style definitely wouldn't be suitable
sure.
for a game like Hellblade 2. This is something that needs to be tighter, more story narrative driven because you're dealing with the psychosis. You're dealing with, her inner demons and everything that's happening. You can't just wander around and pick glacial ice so you can go to your skill tree to level up a sword. That's not what the game's focus is. So I think a well-paced, strong 8-hour experience will be more than sufficient here. It's just going to come down to, are they going to be able to deliver that narrative in a well-paced environment that is impactful to the player? And that was the thing with Hellblade 1, is that as people went through it, it was definitely an experience that some people felt as though it was moving and it was very powerful. And when you're looking at what they're doing here, it looks as though they're trying to amplify that and evolve it in a very significant way. And the scope of the game is definitely much more vast than the first game, just based on the footage that we've seen so far. It's not vast in the sense that the whole world has expanded and become more open, but you have additional characters on the screen, whereas Hellblade 1 was a very solitary experience. So we have group battles. The combat system is definitely far more engaging than the first game was. So it's going to be an interesting game to really get our hands on. It really just comes down to that pacing. If it can deliver a strong narrative within that 8 to 10 hours, I'm going to put my faith in Ninja Theory right now and hope that they're able to deliver.
All right, Nate. Aura History Untold. Really want to have an opinion on this game, and I can't. I'm
I
just not
I
really into these
really
titles.
I really have nothing to say on this title. I'm glad the game exists in the sense of offering diversity in a software lineup, but this is not a genre for me. As the sequence is going on, I was just kind of, you know, snoozing off. I just cannot find myself interested in this particular title. If you have interest in this game, I'm happy for you. I'm happy this game exists for you, but this is a nothing for me.
Strategy game. Developers from games like Civilization 5 behind it. It's fall 2024 for PC. All right, so it's a PC specific game. Which again, you look at it, and then you look at your Xbox controller, and you're like, "Ooh, this will be tough to match up." But the Xbox does support keyboard and mouse, so maybe they're just thinking PC now, and then like they did with Age of Empires, it'll go to Xbox later. But that's kind of where I was. I have fond memories of the original Age of Empires, like when our people on the map were the same size as our buildings. That's where I was. Now it looks super like complex what they were showing. But if you're really into those games and you enjoyed Civilization, that seems like one you definitely want to keep an eye on and check out. All right, the big one. This is the one that I feel like most probably everyone, to be honest, everyone tuned in to see, even just out of curiosity. Machine Games tackling an Indiana Jones title. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is the title for it. Todd Howard talked about even being nervous that he was when he was going to pitch it to Lucasfilm, and obviously they went for it, and like they really went for it because they have Harrison Ford's likeness in the game, which that was obviously kind of a build up and reveal as they were kind of panning around with his hand in the way of his face. And Troy Baker is doing the voice, which he's like found a whole new voice for this. It seems he's very, very close to like that era that we're thinking of for Harrison Ford. And big controversy around this. It is first person. It has like cuts to third person for traversal. So when you swing around on a whip, for example, which good idea because we've seen what that can do to people uh in terms of motion sickness for certain games where they try to go full first person. But it is 2024, Xbox and PC. So originally we talked about this coming maybe sooner than people were expecting. It is indeed coming this year. So that is pretty exciting. Okay. Nate, Indiana Jones first person, yay or nay? Because we were kind of talking about this before, and we're like, I kind of feel like third person's the move here, but they went first person.
I think the move to first person was the perfect move.
Okay, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people were thinking third person, third person, third person. Like Sean is someone who was really like, okay, it cannot be first person, and then it is, and they showed it, and they're like, okay, that was pretty good. I'm okay with this now. So yeah, I feel like if I had the choice, if they're like make this game either third or first, I would make it third person. But I'm not I'm not hating the first person that they showed off here. It looks like it has like somewhat of a comedic tone, like when you pick up the guy and just start punching him in the face over and over again. I know they synced it up to the music, but it had that kind of ridiculous look to it at times. But it felt like Indiana Jones when they were showing it, that kind of style. And
Hmm.
the only thing I'm a little concerned about is if there is a heavy reliance on puzzle solving, kind of what they were showing. I think that might get annoying for me. But if it's here and there kind of thing, like for example, in like Tomb Raider, when you go into certain tombs and stuff, you can solve puzzles for extra bits, and there are some that are mandatory, but it's not overtaking the entirety of the game necessarily. I think I'd be okay with that. So, what do you think of Indiana Jones?
I think they captured the essence and the vibe of Indiana Jones incredibly well in the debut trailer. And as far as the puzzle concerns, I think as long as the game is paced and it's comprised of a lot of adventure and archaeological searches and, finding stuff and just exploring. And then you have the occasional puzzle mixed in here and there, maybe similar to the pacing of an Uncharted game, where you have those environmental puzzles just to overcome a gap or to be able to move forward. I think that will be fine. But you can definitely tell there's a lot of there's a lot of that core feel of Wolfenstein from Machine games here. You can feel the influence of Wolfenstein, but the fact that we were moving to so many different areas across the globe, as we saw, we're going to the Himalayas. There also looked like there's a sequence that we're going to be potentially closer to the coastline, be it maybe China or even Japan, because you saw a Japanese plane in one of the sequences. But
Mhm.
the amount of, I guess, the variety of gameplay styles that we're seeing here with the traversal, stealth, combat, it feels as though this is really blending just numerous genre types, and it looks very cohesive in what they're doing, at least in the demonstration that we have seen thus far. And Machine Games is just a fantastic developer. Wolfenstein, both games were just fantastic. So it feels as though it's in very good hands. And the fact that they are able to catch, really capture the vibes and feel that make Indiana Jones is very encouraging. This feels as though this game feels like something we haven't seen come from Microsoft since the Xbox 360 generation. And that is a good thing. It shows just growth and it's showing variety. And I think the game could potentially be positioned as one of the strongest releases come the second half of 2024. This is going to be a game that, if it reviews well and it is able to capture everything that it is aiming to do, is going to have exceptionally strong word of mouth. And this is going to be that game you talk about with friends. And they're going to say, hey, I got to get an Xbox so I can play that Indiana Jones game that I'm seeing the commercials run for, where I'm seeing those accolade trailers and such. This game could be that title for Xbox. Finally, it just came 4 years, too late into the generation. Had the game come out a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, if COVID had never happened, this whole generation could have gone a different way. It's unfortunate it's coming out as late as it is in the generation,
You
but
think
I think the
Indiana Jones
game is going to
is
be
that strong,
big.
Nate? You think
Yes.
Indiana Jones is that strong of an IP? Okay,
It's a very iconic character.
it is.
I mean, people remember the original trilogy quite fondly, be it Last of the Crusade, Raiders of the Lost Ark. You can ignore the more recent Indiana Jones films, but
Those are
just
the best ones.
the jingle is iconic. Everyone knows it. And that's why they synced up the punching of the Nazi with that
Mm-hmm.
sequence, because it was humorous. It got people to smile and say, okay, I'm interested in this. But I think this is potentially going to be a big win for Microsoft when the game comes out later this year. And I would not be surprised if it is in the Game of the Year conversation.
I think Machine Games is going to turn out a quality product. Yeah, and Microsoft's advertising has been a little strange at times because there are many spots where they don't do any. This I okay, so it seems like this is going to I think going to line up. I don't know if you agree with this, Nate, for second half, maybe September release potentially. I'm
I
saying that because I assume they wanted to avoid Call of Duty by a solid month. Uh, but also have
hmm,
it there ready to roll for the holidays. But if they just get it out around that time, right? So August,
mhm.
September, October, somewhere in there. That seems like one of the big games that you put on standees in stores or on commercials in general. If you're having the Xbox being shown, you put some money for marketing behind indie. Like, it to me, makes the most
Yeah,
sense. It's a
this
character people know and they can
yeah.
relate it to the Xbox.
Yeah, this is a game you put a huge marketing push behind. And that's the thing. You run TV commercials when the game is out there, you hear the Indiana Jones theme, and you're going to look up from your phone and say, wait a minute. And if you see a hype sizzle trailer on TV, it's going to catch your interest. Like, whoa, there's an Indiana Jones game coming out, and that looks awesome. And then if the reviews are strong, I think they're going to position it in the holiday season, maybe second half of October, maybe November. It really comes down to whether or not Microsoft has anything else still to come this year. But let's just say hypothetically, I think we're technically due if we look at prior patterns for a Forza Horizon game. And we know they
Oh
announce
yeah,
those in
that's true.
June and then release them in the second half of the year. We don't typically get huge marketing cycles around a title like that. So if that were to come in the second half, we're kind of in a situation of how do you space out all these games? Because you have to fit in Avowed, Indiana Jones, Call of Duty. I believe Jez Corden said on the Xbox podcast today with Rand that Towerborn has been delayed into the second half of the year. So that's another
Hmm.
title you have to make room for. And all of a sudden, are we in a situation of there's going to be a game a month starting from September through December?
I wouldn't be mad at that. That'd be good.
That
I
would be fantastic.
you know what is interesting? Microsoft has to see these because there has been quite the response to Indiana Jones on social media, on YouTube. People are interested in this. You can clearly see it. I don't say more than what Microsoft would typically do, but it's definitely more than average, I'll say, for them. I wonder if they do look at that and realize, wow, there's a lot of strength in these licensed properties because obviously the Blade is happening.
Hmm.
I wonder if they go, oh, let's get more of these. I mean, I know there is a lot in terms of licensing fee. We saw it with Marvel and Sony. Like we saw the hard numbers, but I mean, you can't deny the reception these licensed properties get, especially if you hand it to a studio that is competent. I'm not talking like Game Mill or something like that who gets GI Joe. I mean, like this is Xbox going to Bethesda or Bethesda going to Machine Games, of course, under Xbox, getting Indiana Jones from Lucasfilm. So I do wonder if we see more of these from Microsoft after the reception.
I think it's going to come down to, is there an IP that really suits the developer in question? When you go from Wolfenstein to an Indiana Jones game with Machine Games, it kind of feels as though it's a natural evolution. They've always made games about beating up and killing Nazis, and they do really well with that particular time frame. So, hey, Indiana Jones is kind of that natural next step of progression. And they're a fantastic studio to take on an Indiana Jones game. And I think they really capitalized on that with this first trailer. And they seem as though they're capturing the humor of the franchise as well, as we saw Todd Howard steal the relic towards the end of the
Mhm.
sequence. So I think if you find the right developer to get a licensed property, kind of like what Sony did with Spider-Man, Insomniac is a good fit for Spider-Man.
Yeah,
So
no, I would agree. Yeah.
if Machine Games is the good fit for Indiana Jones and this can become a, I don't want it to be the only thing that they do. I want to kind of see them do a cycle of, hey, here's Indiana Jones. Our next game, we go back to Wolfenstein.
Wolfenstein.
Then we do an Indiana Jones game again. Instead of being like an Insomniac of everything we're working on for the next 7 years is Spider-Man or Marvel related. Like that's not exciting. It becomes very rinse and repeat and it can risk that feel of stagnation. So if Microsoft is to go that licensing route, and now that you have so many studios under your umbrella, reach out, but go beyond just Disney. Go to, Fox, all these different type of studios and say, what character do you have that has still some mass appeal that we can use and bring some of these IP back that we grew up with that haven't had games, or when we were younger, they were basically just forced into the shovelware type category where nobody was excited about any type of media tie-in because they were always trash. Now they can finally be quality.
Well, there appears to be, I guess, a relationship then between Lucasfilm and Xbox in some way, even if it was with Bethesda. It's still adjacent to Xbox then technically. I mean, they could, I guess, zoom in a little bit, get kind of specific, not just make a Star Wars game, but make an Obi-Wan Kenobi game. Like, remember they did that? I mean, that was done back on the original Xbox where I think Lucas Arts developed that one, but it was a thing and it was one where they focused in on it. Or like there's been that Mandalorian game that's been rumored for a while. That's kind of what I'm picturing, not just a Star Wars game, but like focus in on specific intellectual properties that Lucasfilm has built up in like their streaming, and then they can take them over and make a game out of it.
You see, that would be the thing, is that if you're going to go this route of licensing IPs, I want you to go what we're seeing with Indiana Jones, create original stories. Don't try to like, you know, recreate a movie or anything. Do an original story, do your research, do everything that really pays homage to the franchise that you're looking to represent. And that can go a long way in really building a relationship. And if you can make it a pivotal tentpole to your brand, like Sony has used Spider-Man, that's their thing. People will buy a PlayStation to play Spider-Man.
Yep.
If Microsoft can now use Blade, Indiana Jones, Get a Star Wars game because they feel as though they're willing to license that out to anyone who comes. We've seen EA, we have Ubisoft making one. Secure something related to Star Wars if you see some strength in that. Get as many as you can, but just be sure that you also don't lose your identity in the process. Continue to create original content and IPs that the studios that you now have under your umbrella have really made their reputation on. Don't strip Spyro away from Activision. Allow that team to make a new Spyro game or a Crash Bandicoot or a Tony Hawk. But if that team comes to you and says, hey, we have interest in making
The Incredible
an
Hulk.
yes, an
Oh.
Incredible Hulk, a Captain
Okay,
America,
good.
a Thor
Good.
game,
Oh.
and you say, okay, you guys are good fits for this. Let's see a pitch. That pitch is excellent. We're going to go to Disney and we're going to show them what you have. And if we can make this a reality, we will. And then you go back to those IPs that once again made you famous and renowned. That's a good approach because it allows you to have a lot of variety and diversity in your lineup and also cater to the up and coming audience that frankly has grown up on the MCU and they're looking for Captain America games and Black Widow games and the Incredible Hulk and all those characters that when we were younger, they had some games and mostly they were terrible. We didn't even want to buy them. But that's a good secondary option that I think Microsoft should heavily consider. Again, as long as you have a development team that can do the IP justice. Don't do it just for the sake of having it, because if you do, what you end up with is Rocksteady's Suicide Squad or Crystal Dynamics' The Avengers.
Oh, God. Had to bring up Suicide Squad. I thought we're almost past that. We're like 3 weeks away from that game coming out, being buried, and we can all move on.
It'll never go away.
Well,
It'll look at you from the shelves.
As I mentioned, all these games coming out in 2024, though. So Avowed is fall. Hellblade 2, May 21st. Visions of Mana is over the summer. Fall 2024 for Aura. Indiana Jones, just 2024. I mean, they still have their showcase coming up in the summertime. And there are also discussions around what Activision Blizzard might have for the year. This year is going to be pretty packed for Microsoft, it feels like. So if some of these games really hit, like they come out and it's like, all right, this is an incredible game or something, like Metacritic is blowing up. It could be a pretty strong year, I think, for Microsoft. Like the next 12 months could be substantial for them. So it's what they've been waiting for. And it seems like they've set it up.
And that's the thing. I think the June showcase could be substantial for Microsoft. My only concern with 2024 is that every game but Indiana Jones, they were willing to give be it summer, fall timeframe. Indiana Jones, they simply said 2024, which suggests to me maybe they're not confident enough to lock in that fall window for the game. And I hope it doesn't slide to 2025 because if it does, I feel as though people are going to say that is a significant blow to the year, and Microsoft's year wasn't as good as we were all anticipating in January, but I'm hopeful the game does make this holiday because it can be positioned as a very significant release.
Is there any way that Microsoft looks at the calendar and goes, okay, we just don't have room, and maybe we could spend a little more time polishing Indiana Jones and it ends up in 2025? Because if Avowed is fall, I mean, Aura that's PC. I think that can just release whenever it wants to. That's fine. But you have like Avowed, and then you have Call of Duty, which is going to be massive. Like they're going to clear the runway for that game. Whenever that wants to come out, okay, nothing else is coming out within like a 2-week span of that thing before or after. I almost wonder if they start looking around and going, well, yeah, Indiana Jones. And then obviously any other third-party games that could be coming up and surprise people. So that's my only concern. You might be right, is that they're leaving the door open just in case they either need more time just for polish or it's just too crowded. And we can start off really strong in 2025 with this game now.
If I had to choose a game out of the developer direct lineup that we saw to be delayed, it'd be Avowed. Delay that
Avowed, really, yeah.
Delay that till early 2025. I don't think the lineup is significantly weakened by that absence, but then you do run the risk of, do you want to have Avowed and Fable in the same calendar year potentially?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's actually really tough, man. It's a good problem to have though. When you have games, it
Yeah, it's
happens.
kind of a foreign thing for Microsoft right now. They
It
haven't had
has
this many
been.
games in a long time, and now they might have to sit there and actually look at their lineup and say, "Do we have to make a strategic delay?"
They've come a
Hmm.
long way since Phil Spencer saying it was unacceptable for what year was that? 2022 or
2022 and
21? There was one year he's like it's unacceptable. Now they're to the point where
yeah, it was
they're gonna have to start moving
2022.
games around or
Yeah,
yeah.
2022. They had I think that was the full release of Grounded and Pentiment, and that was their entire year.
Hey, things are shifting. Things are turning around. So let's talk about I do want to so there you go, developer direct. I thought it was good. I put a solid B, maybe B plus on this one, just for the gameplay there, the fact that everything is coming out seemingly this year, and I thought Indiana Jones looked good.
Yeah, I think it was a strong. I think a B plus would be fair in this case. All the games appear to be quality of varying degrees. Indiana Jones was definitely a high note to end on. Hellblade 2 getting a release date, fantastic announcement. Avowed, I think it did enough to show to those interested in the game that there could be a very strong narrative with decisions that will have consequence. It just comes down to that combat and Ara. Sorry, I just don't care.
Let's talk about Palworld. Did you download this?
No.
Nate didn't download this. Everyone in the chat can make fun of him. He didn't download it. It's on Game Pass, by the way. You just it's like 9 GB, I think.
Okay.
I don't think it's not a large game. It was remember it was you know what it was. It was the one that was dubbed Pokemon with guns.
Yeah, I vaguely remember seeing a trailer of like a Charmander with a submachine gun shooting a
Hey,
Pikachu and just saying, "What the hell was that?"
hey. And they have good aim. But it came out, exploded online. I mean, in terms of just interest, 370,000 concurrent Steam players, sold over 1 million copies in no time. I mean, it's like 12 hours. Hey, we sold 1 million copies. And that's not counting on Game Pass, where if you look, there's people all over the place right now on social media talking about this game, playing seemingly on Xbox a lot of the time as well, which I mean that's a big move for Microsoft. Without it, I feel like they didn't necessarily go into that thinking, "Oh, this early access game is going to have this massive interest at launch." They might have looked at it and said this could be kind of cool to put in there. Why not? But I feel like behind the scenes for what they paid to get it in there, they're probably like, "Okay, this is incredible for us right now," because it just entered early access, and it's technically an Xbox exclusive right now in terms of consoles. It I did play it, Nate. Played it for, I think, probably about 4 hours at this point. I'm just about done building up my base and fighting there's like a big boss you fight at like the end of this opening area. But from what I can tell, it's a survival game that has Pokemon elements obviously to it, and then a little bit of Breath of the Wild was in there. Like you get the glider in the game, and then you can also climb up the side of mountains and that sort of thing. And it's not as in depth for survival as I was concerned. I'd get in there and it's like, okay, your character's thirsty now. You have to do this. Okay, your character's sick. Like what I didn't realize it was gonna be a survival game that I was getting into, but really you just have a hunger meter and it's like super infrequent that you have to eat. Like your hunger does not go down that fast. And you just always have I just have a ton of like berries and stuff on me. So occasionally I have to go into my menu and hit Y a couple times, and my character's fine then. But for the most part, it's an action RPG, and you go around and you just beat up Pokemon with a club. That's what I've been doing. You just show up and you just beat them over the head with it, and then you throw. What are they called? I mean, they're Pokeballs basically. You craft them. So there's a whole crafting element to the game. These pals is what they're called. Pal. I feel like Sean probably wrote part of the game or something, but uh, all these you get these pals, and after you capture them, you can set them to work for you at your base. So I've upgraded my base, and I have like 5 or 6 of these little things running around, building stuff for me, collecting resources, and then I'm just off on adventures, finding these ruins and different things laying out in the world, and catching more of these pals. So
Yeah, but
I don't know if there's an
is
evolution tree to them or not. I haven't seen any of
okay.
that, but they level up as you walk around and do things with you. So they're gaining experience. Your character gains experience. There's an entire stat system for them, but then there's also technology points that you then build out like a technology tree that lets you craft more stuff. And I looked at the bottom, there's rocket launchers down there. So I need to get to the bottom to get rocket launchers.
Is this just a meme game?
You know what? I went into this game thinking it was going to be so they had a lot of promises they made go leading up to release. And I was like, there's no way they have all that stuff in an early access game. And it's shockingly robust, like way more than it should be. There's jank to it. There definitely is because again, it's early access. And they make that very clear. I think on Steam it's a $30 game, so it's like not even the full price or anything. But you go into the game and I was just expecting a very shallow experience and there is just consistently more and more stuff being added in to where you have base building. So I built like a little house and it's the crafting and stuff is fine. I'm looking through it. They have all kinds of stuff that you continue to build your base out with for resource management. You can like eventually have your little pals building. You can have like a whole gun like business syndicate thing going on, even where you have the pals building guns for you, and it's more than I thought it was going to be. But also, I wasn't expecting what it is. Like I thought it was going to be Pokemon just slightly more adult with guns and weapons, and your character actually just beats the Pokemon up and stuff. But you don't even have to do really any of that necessarily. After you collect enough of these pals, you can just kind of resource manage and build out your own little business and area in the world. So there's multiplayer to it. Multiplayer has been absolutely crushed because so many people are trying to play it. But this kind of has vibes when Arc was really popular, like that,
Mm,
where people were just flocking to whatever platform they could play it on. In this case, it's PC, of course, with Steam, and it's Xbox. And people were just telling their friends about it. And this is linked kind of to Pokemon. Not that it is Pokemon, but it obviously is pulling so much from it. This many people playing this quickly, though, just in early access. I don't know. This could go places. This could be a serious thing for I mean, yes, Microsoft, but also the company. I've never even heard of them. Hold on, who was it?
but
Like this is the first
that's the
time.
thing. Is this
Pocket Pair.
Pocket
Never heard of
Pair?
them.
Okay.
It's on Unreal Engine.
That's kind of the thing. It feels as though the game's popularity is mostly just due to memeing, and in a few months, 3 months, it's going to be completely gone. No one's going to be talking
Okay.
about it. Remember when Temtem was a big deal?
Got a 9 out of 10 rating. Yeah, I remember Temtem. But here's the thing with Temtem. I feel like they tried to be too much like Pokemon, whereas this plays more into the what's still a pretty popular genre, but like the survival aspect to it. And they've just gone off the wall from there. Like, so it's so out there at times that it feels like it's its own game. Even though there are elements where you look at it and you're like, okay, that's kind of Pokemon. Apparently, they have like their own Team Rocket faction in the game. One time I was walking through a field and someone came up with a gun and pointed it at me. And I was like, what is happening right now? And I just took my bat out and smacked them in the head and they fell over. So there is
Hmm.
like apparently you can capture other humans with the Pokeballs and there's a lot of stuff happening here.
You can
So
capture the humans in the
yes,
Pokeball.
yeah.
What happens if you do that? Do you like enslave them to
I don't
work
know.
on your
People were
base?
showing it online, and I was like, I guess I'll try that at some point. But I recommend people download it and try it because it's more fun than I was expecting. Because I'm not typically into survival style games, but the survival element is so on like the back burner that it's not the main focus of the game. So like you have temperature as well, but it's again very similar. In fact, the temperature gauge looks just like the Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom one, where you just need clothes when it's cold out, kind of thing, and you craft them at a bench, and it's just armor. So it's more fun than I thought, is what I'll say. And I feel like most people, it's a 9 GB download. It's on Game Pass. If you have Game Pass, I recommend just downloading it and trying it and see what you think. You might be surprised. That goes for you too, Nate.
mean, I've seen some of the footage. It does not look like a game that I would play for more than maybe 2 hours. And I still have Prince of Persia to play through, so I'm more than
Not done that
content
yet?
right now. I am 13 hours in. I think
You're
I'm
close. You're close. You're close.
70% through.
Oh yeah, you're almost done.
Yeah, but I'm doing a lot of side quests and stuff,
Okay.
breaking the jars of sand so I can get the lore and the messages of ancient times.
Good game. Good game.
It's a fantastic game.
Very good game. Highly recommend Prince of Persia. It actually came out. Was that today that came out? Yesterday. Today? Yesterday?
The yesterday. Yesterday
Yes.
was the official
Yesterday.
release.
Okay. I recommend it. Prince of Persia, awesome game. Yes, if anyone asks, it is worth the $50. I do believe it is. The amount of time I got out of that
Oh,
game,
absolutely.
23 or 24 hours now. Yes, it is worth the money. Good game. Good game.
Yes.
Out on all platforms too. Nate, what'd you think of your Rog Ally? Did you get a chance to use that thing? If not, I will have to shame you here in front of everyone.
Took it out of the box with
Uh-huh.
a lot of excitement.
Mm-hmm.
I had some recommendations of games I should download on it, and I was hit with just update after update after update. So it is currently charging and updating.
Disappointing.
You didn't tell me it was going to have to do about a dozen updates.
It's a PC. It's running.
I thought I was gonna open it, turn it on, set up my account, and go to Game Pass PC, download something like Forza Horizon or Gears 5 with ease. No, you have to update the driver. Now you have to update Windows. Now you have to update the Xbox app. Now you have to update the Xbox app again. Now you have to update this driver. Now you have to update the sound driver. Update your Wi-Fi driver. If I hit update all, it's like, well, we have to finish the installation of this one before we can update the other. So you have to restart. And then the show here started. So that's where I stopped. It's doing whatever it has to do automatically at this point.
Nate, it's not a Galaxy S5. It gets relevant updates.
One, Galaxy S5 works. It does what it has to do.
Does it? I feel like that's why we lost that everybody 1-2 switch.
No, we lost everybody's 1-2 switch because 1-2 switch is a terrible game.
I mean, it is. It is. I can't say it's
and
not.
We also lost because we had to do a rhythm-based game with no sound.
And on stream.
And on stream where we're watching people in a field just lift their phones up and down, and we didn't know what we were supposed to do. And we ended in a draw because nobody knew what the hell they were doing.
It was a good episode. It was probably the Galaxy S5. We got to be honest. It was probably that was the outlier.
No, it was the game. Mm-hmm. It was just the game was bad.
So the saga we have to do of Nate and his Rog Ally continues.
Once it's done updating, I will give it a try. I want to play Gears of War 5 on it. I want to see how the game looks.
You can download Palworld. Look at that.
I am not downloading
beautiful thing.
Palworld. I want to download something demanding, something of interest. Maybe I'll download Halo Master Chief Collection.
You do that. I feel like Forza's not a bad one to check out, but hey, Palworld's only like 9 gigabytes, man. There you go. You're in.
No.
And she used that higher refresh screen too, now that I think about it.
Actually, I can play Resident Evil 2 Remake. That is now Play Anywhere.
That is a good one.
I could put that on there. I imagine I'm gonna have to tweak a whole bunch of settings to let it run and look good. You'd be
surprised. That one I know on the Steam Deck OLED, which technically is less powerful than the Rog Ally, especially when you pump the Rog Ally's like wattage up, that still can hit 90 frames for that 90 hertz screen. So I even if I cap to 60 and I turn some other things up like visual settings, it still hold it pretty well. So that Rog Ally will actually play Resident Evil 2 Remake definitely probably like a good 60 frames when you play around the settings.
It'd be a nice little thing maybe to go through one of the optional, like, was it Path B? Maybe I'll go through with Leon on the ROG.
Nate, we have to talk about the elephant in the room here. On your this is on your Nate the Hate podcast, right?
What's
you
that?
Started all kinds of stuff online over this. This got kind of out of hand, actually. You said on your podcast that you heard about one Microsoft game that was you said in the Game of the Year conversation,
Hmm.
right? Game of the Year conversation. You didn't confirm or deny if it was ever nominated or anything. Conversation. All
Hmm.
right, a game from Microsoft that's been on Xbox and PC, sure, Game Pass, what have you there, and now it'd be moving to other platforms. This started off the entire windfall of Microsoft is going third party now. They're going to be pushing everything to other platforms. It was social media going down the rabbit hole, and it was wild stuff. Nate, what do you have to say for yourself?
Nothing that I already haven't said.
What'd you say? I forgot what you said.
Said an acclaimed first party game from Microsoft will be coming to competitor platforms in 2024.
Mm. So, like Sea of Thieves. Wait, that wasn't in the Game of the Year conversation. Sea of Thieves was brought up. That was Jeff Grubb. Then Stephen Totillo also kind of backed that up as well, but they weren't able to confirm. Stephen wasn't that it was still a current plan, as it sounds like Microsoft's kind of just played around with the idea of these different games going to. We can just throw PlayStation out there as an example for quite some time. Also, there was like Halo DS. Like this isn't a new concept necessarily. I guess it maybe becoming more public and potentially being a reveal. We could just say, I'll just say either it could be at a state of play or a Nintendo Direct randomly could pop up. We'll say Hi-Fi Rush. That's the leading. That's the leading theory right now. Technically, then they'd be like, okay, whoa, so stuff's happening behind the scenes. But would this really be a problem? Hypothetically speaking, of course, Nate, if Hi-Fi Rush showed up on other platforms, so does that start the snowball down the hill, if you will, and start seeing Gears and Halo and other stuff show up on PlayStation, for example?
I would say no. I don't see if any other first party game from Microsoft came to another platform. I don't know why the immediate reaction or thought process by others is that it would mean Halo, Gears of War, Forza, or tentpole franchises would necessarily have to follow. Microsoft's been very clear in their statements that dating back to the Bethesda acquisition that they would review multi-platform games in a case-by-case basis. So as long as you continue down that path of case by case and you make the decisions based on maybe overall brand appeal of a select franchise or even performance and value it has to the Xbox brand by itself, I don't think it's a detractor from the Xbox on its own. Because at the end of the day, when you think of the Xbox, you're not thinking of a smaller franchise, something in the lines of Sea of Thieves. You're thinking of Halo, you're thinking of Gears of War, Forza, things of a high caliber. And if Microsoft continues to keep those exclusive to their console, that provides an incentive to invest and purchase an Xbox system. A title like Sea of Thieves going multi-plat, I would view in the same vein as Minecraft. Where's
Right,
really,
like
how
the
does it
service-based
hurt?
stuff,
Yeah,
right?
it's a server based thing. It allows extra
Right.
revenue
Yep.
to come into that development studio and Microsoft as a whole. And they can continue to support the game or they can use that extra revenue to fund a sequel or other experimental games within their vast catalog of developers. So I don't see really how it spells doom in any way for the brand. But, it really comes down to Microsoft coming down with very clear and concise messaging of if this is the avenue that they're going to explore, they have to be willing to just lay it out there and be very clear of how they're approaching this. And if it is continues to be a case by case basis, say it and that's fine. But right now I don't see any reason for any doom or gloom around the Xbox brand. It's at the end of the day, this is a business. And you had Tim Stewart has come out and he said, we want to put games on different platforms. People took it as misspeak. Then this week, you also kind of had a repeat of a very similar stance. So you could argue that the statement made this week saying, oh, yeah, with Activision, we can now be a publisher on all platforms was strictly referring to Call of Duty.
Mm-hmm.
But if Microsoft sees value in bringing a handful of IPs or just a few IPs to different platforms, I don't view it as a negative. At least not in the immediate, but it really comes down to the messaging and how Microsoft approaches potentially this type of initiative.
Yeah, I've been looking around to see what the general reaction and reasonings were for them, and a lot of it does come back to the console itself. Like, the idea that Microsoft would start to see less and less interest and less importance in the console, and then eventually we get to a point where they don't really need it anymore. I feel like that's the main concern that people are putting out there right now is could we work towards that future sooner than expected? And I say sooner than expected because I kind of look around and think that many people believe that we are eventually going to get to a point where the console kind of goes away. It sounds weird now, but I mean, who knows 20 years from now where we are with technology and all these publishers really seem to want the idea of subscription services. Maybe not every single one of them, but you hear them talk about it, like a Ubisoft, for example, that sort of thing. So it does make you wonder of the console's lifespan in general. And with Microsoft, the Xbox Series is technically tracking behind the Xbox One, and that seems weird to me because the Xbox One had such bad PR to start, and I just feel like it never caught any real acceleration throughout the generation and ended up like below the 360 by a serious margin. And now I wonder if the Xbox Series will continue to work in that direction. Like, do you think it's an issue if the Xbox Series doesn't catch, say, the Xbox One this generation?
I don't think so. The problem is we don't know what Microsoft's internal expectations are for the Xbox Series line of hardware in terms of sales or even growth over that of the Xbox One. Because you could make the case that up to this point of the generation, when we've looked at supply of the Xbox Series X, even the Series S, it seems as though Microsoft really wasn't producing these at a high level. They were almost producing them to demand. And that's very unusual from a console manufacturer to see that type of approach. Usually you want as many systems on shelves as you can get because you want to sell them to the consumer. Whereas Microsoft, the Xbox Series X, they had to come out, what was it, last year to say, we're finally putting more on the shelf and you can order them on Amazon without going on a list.
Yep.
That's baffling that 3 years into a console generation that there was still a list to order the game from online retailers or to even have to come out and say we're going to ship more Series X this year. Why such hesitation in shipping your flagship system? It kind of feels as though maybe Microsoft has been slowly making a pivot towards just service. Whereas you look at Nintendo and Sony and you would say they are hardware companies. Above all, they want to sell their box in turn to sell their software.
Mhm.
Whereas Microsoft right now is trying to sell you the hardware in order to sell you the service known as Game Pass. But Game Pass is also available on PC. It's also available on Samsung televisions. So their interest is to sell that service. So hardware is really just the conveyance in which you sell the service of Game Pass. And that's where like you have some people speculating, oh, if they do bring a select few games to a competitor platform, does that mean Microsoft is bowing out of the hardware industry? Absolutely not. The hardware industry is still going to be important to Microsoft because they need that means of selling the service in some way. And the Xbox as a box is going to be that conveyance. That's not going to change. And they would still have an advantage of if these games, remain a timed exclusive for let's say up to 2 years, if you really have an interest in that game, are you going to buy the Xbox or get Game Pass on PC, play the game day one, either by buying it or having Game Pass, or are you going to wait 2 years to then pay full price to play it on your PlayStation?
I get the idea of we'll port it later kind of thing. I mean, that's what Sony's doing with PC right now. So that idea has been
Right.
in play, right?
Hmm.
The the thing that's so interesting about Microsoft is it kind of feels like one part of the company's got a certain vision and the other part of the company has a different vision, and it's the messaging, as you mentioned or alluded to before, is very mixed right now because on one side it feels like Phil Spencer is playing into the idea of there being exclusivity for games and trying to be straightforward about it, but on the other side, as you mentioned, Satya Nadella even discussed this when he was talking about Activision Blizzard, and you said what Tim Stewart. where they don't necessarily understand that world. So they're like, oh, yeah, we're just going to sell this software everywhere. It's going to be great. Look at all these people we can sell to, make money. But there's more of a long term vision of if you have the catalog and the games here, people will then come here. So that to me, that's kind of the way a lot of us, I feel like older people look at it. It's like you make the games to attract people to the hardware that in turn brings them into your ecosystem that you then continue to sell software to.
Mhm.
So it's interesting for Microsoft and the path they're taking right now, and maybe some of this has to do with them buying a lot of these bigger publishers like an Activision Blizzard and like a Bethesda or ZeniMax, where they already have the feeling of, oh, we want to put these games on multiple platforms, and now it's like, okay, you're just going to put them on this platform.
Mhm.
So there could be some cultural clashes, we'll say, behind the scenes there, even. But Microsoft, one way or the other, let's say they just start putting games, as you mentioned, on Xbox, then on Game Pass first, and then it goes to other platforms like Hi-Fi Rush. If that showed up on the Switch in, we'll just say, the next direct, right? Boom, there it is. And it shows up a few months later or something with a solid release date they give us. Pre-orders are open. That game would do pretty well. I think they would find an extra half to even a full million copies on the Switch, and that would that'd be pretty big for them, considering they had what 2 million players was the last number I saw them announce, and that's just players, so people who downloaded really from Game Pass for the most part. And I think that would just accelerate their plans to do that with those one-off games or service-based games like you mentioned with Sea of Thieves. So
Mhm.
it is something that could mess up their console strategy, but at the end of the day, they're about revenue. And hey, if they turn in some serious revenue reports with gaming because they're selling these things on other platforms, their shareholders will be fine with it and probably even push them to continue doing it.
See, one of the thoughts I've had in recent times is that when Microsoft really fully committed to the idea of day one releases on PC, I wonder if they maybe underestimated the amount of people who wouldn't buy an Xbox because they can just play those games on PC. Because that was never really an issue that they had experienced before. Because if you
Mm.
wanted to play those Xbox games, you had to buy the system. The second you made it day one on PC as well, you remove that incentive to buy an Xbox to that PC audience who otherwise would have had to buy an Xbox to play those games. And I wonder if Microsoft wasn't expecting that sizable audience to really just stick with PC as quick as they did.
Do you
Because
think
that's going to eat into your hardware sales as well.
do you think that was part of the pitch from Phil when he was talking to Satya Nadella about, oh, let's go buy Minecraft, and then we're also going to put these games on PC day one to open it up to a wider audience? And because he had to have pitched like a 10 or 20-year plan, something crazy, and then also tied it in the
Mm.
cloud. And I almost wonder if that was just part of the pitch. It's like, we're going to open this up and get it on a platform like the PC where we have Windows, and we'll tie it to our Windows store. And you might be right though about that. Like right then and there, it might have said, well, in order to save Xbox, we have to open this up outside of Xbox. And
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a so Nintendo and Sony don't like take their game, like Nintendo is the most strict about it, right? They're like, we're not putting these games anywhere else. Uh Sony doesn't, but eventually they do on PC. And it's just because they have the hardware numbers. It's like they have a large audience they can sell these games to without much issue. And I just feel like Microsoft is continuing to look outside of Xbox because costs on these games are going up, and Sony's going to run into this too eventually. Just based on logic and math, eventually they're gonna, you could say, outgrow the PlayStation user base. And they're kind of flirting with that now with, PC games happening sooner and sooner to where Helldivers is coming out on PlayStation and PC at the same time. So
you see,
it's
that's gonna be the interesting thing, is that let's just say not necessarily the PlayStation 5 generation, maybe towards the end of it, but even the start of the PlayStation 6. If Sony gets to the point where they launch a PlayStation launcher on PC and they start doing day and date with their games, you're gonna have to look to see if they see any type of hardware dip. Because I'd say PC gaming is more popular now than it were 15 years ago. Because
yes.
people are now, they want to have those best visuals, the best frame rates, the best ray tracing and such. And PC is always going to have that edge. Whereas You go back 20 years, remember there was a period of time where the original Xbox or even the 360 technically had a advantage over the PC sector. That was the premier way to play games was on a home console at a time. That is no longer the case. Consoles are now secondary to PC, and there's that enthusiast crowd. So if you start putting more day and date releases, especially if you're Sony, what type of sales and hardware are you going to potentially see dip? It's not going to, it's not going to be tens and tens of millions, but it is going to be something. And I think that has impacted Microsoft a little bit. And that's just not a conversation that anyone is having at this point because the damage or the impact of it is hard to measure because we don't have anything to really put it up against. But I would guarantee that there is some percentage of individuals who would have bought an Xbox Series X, be it for Forza Horizon or whatever, didn't because their PC is more than capable enough of playing those games. Which is fine because that's what Microsoft has gone out and said in their agenda. You can play it on PC, we're fine with that. And that's where I wonder what type of internal goals they are really setting for themselves when it comes to hardware. Because we, as a consumer, as fans, as personalities and commentators on the industry, we can only look at numbers and compare them to their competitors and say, well, PlayStation 5's at 80 million, the Xbox Series X is at 50 million. Sony won the generation. But if Microsoft's internal targets for the generation were, let's say, 45 million, and they eclipse that, and then they saw a sizable increase of Game Pass subscriptions that, let's say, overdid their own internal estimations, they're viewing it as we had a very successful generation. And those are just those type of details we're not privy to. And it's becoming more and more difficult to say what determines a successful hardware in the current environment within gaming, because we see the hardware sales come out of Europe where the Xbox is down year over year. But the Xbox presence in Europe is very minimal to begin with. So it's not a surprise that the sales aren't strong there. We just don't know what they're anticipating in those regions.
I almost wonder if Microsoft's also hoping that there is a serious buy into the cloud in the next 5 or 10 years or so, and maybe that's one of the reasons they're thinking about their next system coming out sooner is because maybe it does have a reliance on cloud and AI more so than we can think of now. That's the only reason I can think of them trying to jump out ahead. They said the most important generation when it came to digital goods. Maybe they don't want to lose the generation that's coming up that'll have to do with tying all of that together with AI and cloud. So it's interesting stuff. Is there a game, Nate, that would show up? Let's just say next year a game shows up on PlayStation from Microsoft. Is there one that would make you kind of look at that and go, "Oh, okay, whoa, what is Microsoft doing right now? What's happening here?"
I think the only type of game that would make me have that reaction is if it was one of their premier IPs. Like if
Okay.
next year we saw a Gears of War collection or Halo Infinite's multiplayer appear on PlayStation 5, I think that would get me to say, whoa,
Halo's
that's
the
an
one I think that would
interesting,
do it.
yeah. Like that would be a
Yeah.
thing of sitting there saying, now that's interesting. But anything else, it's business.
Okay. All right. I didn't know if like Gears of War would have done it for you or something there.
It'd have to be like an older title.
Okay.
I just
Okay.
That's where like something like Halo Infinite, it's been out now for a while. If that went there, it would still be a case of wow, they actually put Halo on something else. Which yeah, we've all seen the tech demo of Halo on the DS, but different time, different place, different situation altogether.
Mm. Well, I think it is for me. It definitely is Halo. If Halo showed up, I'd be like, "Ooh, that's an interesting move." Just because Master Chief is so tied in heavily to the Xbox console and the Xbox brand, so that's the one I think I would keep an eye out for there. But it's the second half of this generation is going to be it's going to be something. It really will. So I'm curious to see how all that turns out. But that's actually our show for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining us on Direct Xbox. And we're gonna do a separate stream for like 20 or so minutes. We're just gonna hang out with the patrons. So come on over to the Spawncast Networks, patreon.com/Spawncast. We'll hang out over there. We'll have a stream go up in the next like 3 or 4 minutes. Hop on there. So everyone over on the Patreon should have the page appear for that over on the site. And anything else you want to add, Nate, before we head on over?
Thank you for joining us for our first live Direct Xbox show. Do you consider pledging to the Patreon page so you can come follow us into the Q&A bonus show following this immediately. So if you have any questions about any of the topics we just discussed, you can do so there. And thank you for watching.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.